Morning and welcome to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse
and you get
Jackson.
Oreo Gold.
The views
Yeah,
and
I'm gonna call
opinions
her
her?
back.
expressed
She didn't
are
pick up the
not
first time.
necessarily
I'm
Oh,
gonna
okay.
call her
those of the
back.
She just
station
sent me a
which
link.
they have
Okay.
I mean, she asked requesting a link.
To speak with Reverend Jackson live, call toll free 1 866 594 HOPE. That's 1 866 594 4673. And now, the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
I think
Hmm?
those are on time.
No, it's not. My headphones are not working over here. No, no, I'm gonna take these out.
Oh, that's not it. There you go.
Hey, everybody! Welcome to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jackson. How you doing, Ryan? This morning,
Good. How are you?
it's wonderful hearing your voice, Greenville. We tease each other. My father's from Greenville and South Carolina, of course, because there are a lot of Greenvilles.
Yeah.
But there's only one Greenville, Greenville.
Yeah. Greenville.
Greenville, South Carolina. It's wonderful to be with you. And we're sending Jeremy our love. He is out today, working, of course, but you work too. So there we go. Everybody, we are talking about these student protests. What's going on with them? And I know that would be close to you because they're very close to you in age. And it is the young people who are really stemming the tide of this election. I'm hearing the corporate media say a lot about about well, this is not the highest priority with young people. No, that is not true. Or am I wrong? Ceasefire is important to you, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not trying to suggest because if it is, why?
I think it's important to us as young people, and I like that we do have a voice about it now. And
Okay.
I think that they're finally listening.
Well, and you're finally acting.
Yeah.
Because remember, the civil rights movement was pushed by a lot of young people. Um, and they were guided by their elders, and then I mean, we all work together. It's never just one strain, but we are going to be talking about that today because these young people are misunderstood. Well, they're being mischaracterized, quite frankly. You don't know what they're asking for, and we need to look at the counter protesters and who they are. The counter protesters are the ones who are standing in the middle of these peaceful protests and they're shouting racial epithets and things like that. That's what they're doing. It is not these young people. These encampments are very peaceful, loving spaces, and they've been doing that with intention. So we got to talk about that today. This really is about us looking at who we really are. This American Imperial Project, this Anglo-American Imperial Project, because it is the British and Americans who've wanted to establish a beachhead in that part of the world so that they can tap into those resources. There are many layers to this. It goes beyond, whether Jewish people and Muslims can live together. That people have been living together for a long time. And while that might be a little bit of an issue, this really is about politics and power. And what we're seeing happen to our young people who are being banned from campus. Indeed, Bryce Green, who's with us today, has been banned from his campus and as he's in his graduate program for 5 years. 5 years. Not for getting into a fight, but for his political activism. So we're going to talk about that. I'm Santita Jackson. I want you to call us at 866-594-HOPE, 866-594-4673 on Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. We are on the iHeartRadio app. Go to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson, and you can get us right there. Our home station, the super station out in Southern California, is Patriot 1150. Sending so much love to them and the Buzz in Cincinnati and all of these places all around the country who carry the Keep Hope Alive show. I want you to know we are streaming live on the Reverend Jesse Jackson Senior page, on the Santita Jackson and Friends page, and on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. So please join Jewel and Robert and Shirley from beautiful Philadelphia and Bernadette and so many of you. And please like and subscribe on my YouTube page and share. Share the show, everybody. Share. I want you to hear from these students. We're not just going to talk about them today, Ryan. We're going to hear their stories. What's happening at UNC Chapel Hill? What happened at Indiana University? They had their graduation yesterday and people were protesting. People have been demonstrating, dissenting all over the country. Are we hearing them? And what's going to happen in August in Chicago? Many people are saying that this is a harbinger of things to come. So you let us know what your thoughts are. Do these students have a right to protest? Do you really know who these counter protesters are? I think if you know, might help to shape your thinking about this. Not to mention what happened at UCLA. We're going to have a lot of people talking about that today. The counter protesters entered the encampment, everybody. They released rats onto the encampment. They started beating up those who were staying in the encampment. And the police stood down. The police and the campus police stood down for 3.5 hours. They let it happen. They watched. They said, well, we weren't told what to... Really? And why is it that Palestinian and particularly some Black protesters have been the targets of anti-Black racism? They've been spat upon. They've been called the N-word. There's so much that's going on. And, I guess the upside of this is that so much that has been buried, that people have attempted to bury, is being raised up. Well, they do say the truth crushed to the earth shall always rise. I'm Santita Jackson. This is Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Call us at 866-594-HOPE, 866-594-4673. Back in just a minute.
Your opinion counts.
All right, Santita. We have everybody on the line now.
Oh, okay. Hi, everybody on the line. Oh.
Hi, Santita.
Ariel, you see, you didn't have to be on camera today. You still, and I know you love me even more.
All prepared.
Oh, baby, that's all right. It's okay. And let me say, Trinice.
Hi, good morning.
How are you this morning?
I am doing good.
All right. Julia, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Oh, is Kat with us?
Good morning. Yes, here I am.
Hi, Kat. How are you?
I am hanging in there. How are you doing?
Oh, girl, you're doing more than hanging in there. You're doing great. And Bryce Green. Now, Julia, Bryce, Trinice, and Kat, our young people here. Ariel Gold, our sister beloved, is she was the co-national director of Code Pink. And now she is the executive director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Why don't you explain what the Fellowship of Reconciliation is? Indeed, this was an organization of which Dr. King was a part, and he was very proud to be a part of this organization, Ariel.
And we were very proud. We are very proud that he was a member of our organization. He was a member of only two. He was a card-carrying member of only two organizations in his lifetime. Fellowship of Reconciliation was one. We are the oldest interfaith peace and justice organization in the country and in the world, for that matter. We formed in 1914 in Europe and 1915 in the United States to support conscientious objection to war. And we are still supporting conscientious objection to war, including raising up the actions of brave teenage Israelis choosing to go to prison rather than military conscription as a way of transforming their doing their part to transform their very, very broken society. And we speak out, have since 1914, and continue to speak out against war and all forms of hatred and racism and violence.
Love it. So now you know who she is. Bryce Green has been banned from his campus at Indiana University for 5 years for his political activism. Kat, and I will be calling you
Keep
by
up
your
alive.
first
Good
names.
morning,
If that is that what everyone prefers?
Keep up alive. Good morning, Anita.
Hi. Okay, you know the numbers already. Okay.
Yeah. Hold
Okay.
on 1 second.
Because I want to make sure that we're doing this correctly. Okay. So, and would you like for me to identify your schools?
Yes, that's fine for me.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just want to make sure. Just want to make sure. And but I'm so excited that you all are here today because we're excited that you're going to be sharing your experiences. And so, okay. Uh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry, you guys. I'm trying to tweet at the same time. Oh, this is a whole lot. Okay. But I'm glad that you all are with us today. Okay, let me see.
You're listening to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Call 1-866-594-HOPE. That's 1-866-594-4673.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm Santita Jackson. What a pleasure it is to be with you today on Sunday, May 5th, 2024. Boy, the year is moving on and there's so much that is going on. And so we want you to engage us today. Call us at 866-594-HOPE, 866-594-4673. If you listen to talk radio, if you listen to call-in shows that are still on television, you hear a lot of misinformation, mischaracterization of these students who are at these encampments. I'm sure we heard the same thing about students as they were in the sit-in movement in the 50s and 60s. And we need to talk about that. We need to talk about what's actually happening. What are their asks? What are they fighting for? And joining Ariel Gold and I this morning, of course, she's the executive director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. I'm so glad that you're with us today. We're the elders on the panel, Ariel. Oops, and we have the hair to show it. Ain't bad. Yeah, we do. We've got Julia, who's a grad student from UNC Chapel Hill. What a time they've had there. Bryce Green, grad student at Indiana University. He's a student organizer. And he's been banned from his campus for 5 years while he's in the midst of his graduate program. Trinice from FAMU and the Youth Action Fund. What is happening in Florida? Kat, who is from Florida State University. They're dissenters, Florida State University dissenters. I welcome you all to the show. We're very, very excited. Reverend Jackson is listening right now and very excited about all that they're doing, Ariel, because indeed he comes out of a sit-in movement. His first school was the University of Illinois, and he was on a football scholarship. He did not have a good experience there at all. And so he transferred to North Carolina A&T because that is where they had the famed sit-ins at the Woolworth counter. And he said, that is where I want to be. and he was able to organize and build from there. So these young people are on a trajectory. Ariel Gold, I think that we should be proud of them as we listen to their stories. What say you? Because you were worried that they were being smeared, Ariel.
Well, I am watching them be smeared, and I am angry. I am just angry. You know, they are desperate. We know that. We know that they are desperate, and so they are falsely framing these protests as anti-Semitic, which they are not. These are protests that are based in love and um, in the conviction of what is right. And we need to do everything that we can to raise up the fact that a false narrative is being promoted. And these protests are about liberation for all. Right now, that means liberation in Palestine. And I want to mention that tonight begins International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And we know that right now, never again means Gaza.
Why does it mean Gaza?
Well, because never again was never supposed to be about just Jews. It's not about the genocide not ever happening only to Jews again. It's about genocide never happening anywhere ever again. And, you know, as somebody who's Jewish and as somebody who's very attached to Jewish history, this is forever now. Our history. This is forever now written in the books of Jewish history. This period where we ourselves committed not only gross oppression and apartheid, but now genocide. And I can't begin to contemplate how long and how much it will take for us as a people to atone for that. But the only relief that I find from that is watching Jewish youth right now be part of these encampments and protests, watching Jewish youth be in solidarity with Palestinian brothers and sisters, knowing that never again means anywhere for anyone ever. And right now, that's Gaza.
Amen to that. Well, Bryce, let's start with you. In a couple of minutes, you've been banned from campus for 5 years, but let's back up. Why don't you talk about the demonstration of which you were a part a little more than a week ago and what it looked like?
Right. Well, as you said, I was banned from campus for 5 years. And that was the only reason for that was because students, including myself, decided to host a demonstration, a peaceful demonstration, in which we set up an encampment in what is typically designated as the free speech zone. In response to this, the university, they sent out first the university police department, but they then called on the state police troopers. And the state police brought out a military level of response, including armored vehicles, assault weapons, shotguns with pepper balls. They had a chopper circling overhead. They had a drone providing overwatch, and then they put a sniper on the roof that was aiming its rifle at peaceful demonstrators. And so the riot police and the state troopers, they cleared the encampment, arrested a bunch of people. Of course, students are committed to the cause, and we came back to the space. And then 2 days later, the state police came again, specifically targeted me as an organizer. And then I was arrested and issued a ban initially for 1 year. And this ban was extended to 5 years. And I'm also facing trespassing charges. And I can't return to the campus under the threat of a felony. Now, of course, all of this was designed to intimidate students and punish them for activism. None of it seems like it's going to stick, but the fact that it was issued against me seems to indicate that they are very concerned about my organizing, about our student organizing in general, and how students feel about Palestine.
So what does this mean, this 5-year ban? You can't go on campus. Can you take classes? Is this virtual? What's going to happen with you now?
Now, I'm technically a student. I'm sure if they if they could, they would have expelled me, but that requires an actual due process. What this ban does is it is able to summarily harm my educational prospects. I can't go to class. I can't go in person to visit the advisors. I can't, attend lectures, colloquia, etc. But I'm still a student. I do intend to continue my education. I don't intend to allow this, political repression to prevent me from getting an education. I believe that it's possible to fight crime, even if there is university repression. Everyone who organizes for Palestine understands that there are extreme power centers that are willing to, pull out all the stops to prevent you from doing your organizing. But you just can't be deterred. Even if they'll lie about you, they'll say that we were violent, and they'll say that we had weapons in the camp. Being lied on by the police should be an expectation of everyone fighting for a just cause. Even if it's peaceful, even if you're completely in the right, and even if you have video documentation of everything that happened. Will come, and labeling us anti-Semitic is, of course, a way to delegitimize the very real concerns of the protesters in the public's eye.
Indeed, there was a demonstration, a protest, if you will, at Northeastern University more than a week ago. And it was 100 demonstrators, according to press reports, and it was peaceful. And a counter protester got in the line with an Israeli flag shouting, "Kill all the JEWSs." And so he said that, and people started booing him. Well, according to this Daily Beast report, when police returned to the campus the next day, they arrested the demonstrators, but not this guy. Wow. Julia, what's happening at UNC Chapel Hill?
Yeah, I think in many ways it's similar to what we're seeing elsewhere. On Tuesday, the police violently came into the encampment at like 5:30 in the morning, arrested students. And then later in the day, we had a protest against what had just happened, at which the U.S. flag was lowered and the Palestinian flag was raised. And this seems to have activated conservatives and likely white nationalists. And we saw this very interesting and horrifying moment of Zionist counter-protesters working with these white supremacists, Christian nationalists, super conservative folks to make sure the U.S. flag did not touch the ground and was re-raised. And they also, the interim chancellor was the person who personally re-raised the flag. And afterwards, the counter-protesters and these other groups of people, these Christian nationalists, white supremacists, were cheering, chanting USA, USA. He's like shaking their hands. It was horrible. And now we have 15 or maybe more students who have been suspended, are also banned from campus. And so right now we're calling for full amnesty for the students, and we're continuing to call for the university to disclose its investments and divest from Israeli occupation, genocide, and apartheid.
Have you been in touch with the administration about your demands?
Yeah, we have tried to be over and over. We've tried to be in touch with them since October, and they just don't seem to care. They seem to care more about the U.S. flag. Oh, sorry. Also, I forgot to say, since Tuesday, they have erected this huge fence around where the flag is. It really looks like a military state. There's a huge police presence remaining on campus. And they also installed all these new cameras, and it just really is surreal.
What do you when you hear that your protests are anti-Semitic? What is your experience?
So I am Jewish, and I've been in this movement for a long time. And I think at these protests, we're not seeing any anti-Semitism. Supporting Palestinians is not anti-Semitic. And I mean, at the protest at UNC Chapel Hill, which is what I can personally speak to right now, the only anti-Semitism we saw were the white supremacists and the Christian nationalists who showed up there, who believe in their core mission that they need to blame everything on the Jews. And then we saw Jewish Zionist counter protesters allying with them. And so I think this false conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is categorically false and really delegitimizes this actual anti-Semitism we are seeing and we constantly see from white supremacists, from Christian nationalists, from Christian Zionists. And yeah, so I think we just have to remember that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and we have to know that the efforts to say that pro-Palestine protests are anti-Semitic is just an effort to smear the movement and to smear these protesters.
Well, you know, Julia, that has been conflated for so long. It's hard for us to, it's going to be a challenge for us to get out of it, you know, because if you lodged any criticism of Israel, you've been automatically deemed anti-Semitic. If you just stood up for the Palestinians and said, hey, what you're doing to them is wrong, you've been labeled anti-Semitic. And it's just, I think it's just something we're going to have to work our way through. Trinice, you're at FAMU. Why are you involved? And what are you seeing down in Florida where they're in the DEI and everything else?
Well, for me, I am involved with working with students like Kat, who's over at FSU, because unfortunately at the moment, FAMU does not have an encampment. Hoping for that to change soon. But I initially got involved when one of my friends told me that FSU was hosting a Israel week, and that they had an IDF soldier speaking on the campus, and that they wanted to do an event, wanted to do action, disrupting it. So originally I was a little hesitant to get involved with the issue, mostly because I didn't see too many Black people or too many people that look like me involved in this type of work. For the most part, it is usually white leadership, and I get a little anxious around that. But knowing that these are Black and brown student leaders, I decided to help them out, and just seeing firsthand how white the Israelis are was eye-opening to me, especially whenever they were like, hey, free Palestine, they started doing the disruption. There was this white man, he started screaming, his face is red as a tomato. I got a little scared thinking he's going to put his hands on some of the students, which has been a common trend over at FSU for their encampment, is the fact that it's usually very angry white men try to come up to the encampment and start stuff. But being able to witness that firsthand kind of caused me to want to get more involved, especially learn the fact that Palestinian students don't really have that much of space at FSU, and how come they have to constantly deal with their Zionist student government, their Zionist administration, and all these struggles, which as a Black person, obviously I relate to. That's why I chose to go to HBCU. Also, I'm involved due to the fact that Youth Action Fund is pro-Palestine. Mm-hmm. One of my bosses, he was over against and helping set that up. He was arrested. My boss, he's currently over at UL helping out with the there.
Well, hold on 1 second. We're going to make a hard break right now, but I want to find out. No, don't apologize, because Black students are involved, and Black students, when they get involved, are being punished more severely, along with Palestinian students. We got to talk about that. Back in a minute.
Your opinion counts. 1-866-594-HOPE.
Just that, like, currently, where I'm at in Tallahassee, I just didn't see that many Black leaders.
No,
I'm
stand
sorry.
by. Stand by, honey. Well, now, just so that everyone knows, we're on Facebook and YouTube, so our cross chatter during the breaks can be heard. If you don't want to participate in that, you don't have to say anything, okay? But you can continue because people, the audience, really enjoy hearing what we talk about during the breaks. Would you like to continue, Trinice?
Sure.
Okay, go on.
Well, I mean that, like, not seeing Black people. I just mean, like, locally, there's not that many. Unfortunately, on the local level, there's not that many, like, Black people I see involved with the movement. The only examples of leadership I could bring up at the moment is, like, Angela Davis or Malcolm X or Jesse Jackson. And that's not to negate any other current leadership at the moment. Those are just the ones I know. But that's pretty much how I've been getting involved with this work, which is, like, helping out organizations like Tallahassee Centers, with anything that they need, and stuff like that.
Well, anyone else have anything they want to say? We'll be coming back up in about a minute. Ariel, are you surprised by what you're hearing? Because, we're not even hearing about how these students are being, and Kat, I'm going to come to you right after the break. Okay, hon?
I'm not surprised. And the reason I'm not surprised is that they have worked, and when I say they, I'm speaking about the Anti-Defamation League and both Jewish establishment and Christian evangelical Zionist establishment have spent not just years, but decades laying the foundation for this falsely smearing leftist Jews and people of color and creating an atmosphere of repression and support for Israel at any cost.
Well, hold that thought. Hold that thought. We're coming back up.
That's
All right. Hold on.
4673.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Keep Up Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm Santita Jackson in the studio with Mr. Greenville, Ryan Lee. Interesting conversation, is it? Were you aware of the militarized presence that's hovering over these students at these campuses? Were you aware of this,
I was
Ryan?
not aware of that part. I've been aware of the protests going on at the campuses, but I did not know it was to this extent.
That they're the ones who are being surveilled.
Right.
And they're the ones.
Yeah.
Snipers were on the roof when Rice was at his demonstration. I'm like, wait a minute. It's like this is another Kent State before I go to you, Kat. I mean, Ariel, I was a little girl when Kent State happened, but it was still horrifying, because my parents were very involved in the anti-war movement and civil rights, and Ariel, and Ryan, I want you to know, because they had students were killed at South Carolina State. This happened. This was the 4 major campus uprisings that were quelled by guns from our government. Ariel, I think we've got to look at that before I go to Kat. Because it's when you have these guns. Well, before I even come to you, Ariel, because I want you to finish your thought, Trinice, because one of the things that is unsettling is this militarized presence that is focused on you. And it's just one false move. We could have a tragedy. We could have bloodshed, Trinice. What say you?
Yeah, the militarization is terrifying. I also did not know to the extent that university police had this much things, which that kind of makes me, that kind of seems like why certain things aren't being paid for in school budgets. But one, like I mentioned before, my boss was over at UF doing some work with the campus there, and he told me that apparently the University of Florida Police Department has a tank. like they're just going to use. I was shocked to see that at Tampa, which the university is, University of Southern Florida had tear gas thrown at the students. I did not think they will go that far to be that militarized. Let's first in Tallahassee, we have not faced that level of intimidation yet. But it's very jarring and shocking to see that they're willing to treat us as if like we're at war when all we're asking for is like divestment and disclosure of like funds and also the fact that we're also being seen by these institutions too. It's very shocking, jarring, and like most people kind of think about Kent State University and the fact that we're kind of edging the line between. That we're getting close to that tragedy, which I hope we don't cross that line to get to that point.
Before I come to you, Kat, Ariel, it's almost, I mean, the militarization is something corporate media are ignoring. They're not talking about this at all.
At all. This didn't surprise me at all. This is all part of the aftermath of 9/11, right? This is when we started to see this. And I remember, you recall, Santita, not too long ago when the Boston bomber happened, and they closed down that whole city. Now, granted, of course, that was all for finding the Boston bomber, but I remember seeing that city shut down militarily. I remember taking a breath back and saying, oh shit. Sorry.
It's okay. It's all right.
Is the capacity of our militarized police. And let's not forget for a moment that those police have been training in collaboration with the Israeli military, each sharing their worst practices, right? Us coming out of a country birthed in slavery and genocide of the native people, and Israel, where weapons around the world, or urban warfare, is tested on a live Palestinian population. So we can look, just at Atlanta alone, which is building this top city, and they have long had a shared training program with the Israeli military. And then we just saw them take that out on the students of Emory there. So this really isn't a surprise, and we should all be worried about the Democratic Convention in Chicago, because they're going to be ready for us that way.
Well, Kat, you tell me. Florida State University dissenters, you're on the move. What are you seeing?
Good morning.
Good morning.
It was Thursday, and we arrived around 4 o'clock. And within the next 5 minutes, some officers had come up to us with a student code of conduct explaining that we cannot pitch tents for our encampment. And we were around, I would say, 7, 8 o'clock, told that we have to move because all of a sudden they want to mow the lawn. So we relocated. Then they want to clean a fountain, so we had to relocate again. They turned on the sprinklers. We stayed. We had folks standing in front of the sprinklers, not standing down, because Palestine is not free. We are not liberated people. So, we are going to stay until our voices are heard and these universities disclose and divest. So as others have mentioned, there was a heavy police presence. There was Florida State troopers, there was Florida State University police, and some sheriffs. And thankfully, we didn't have to engage too much with them, unlike other schools, but there was definitely a presence. And eventually, there were so many counter-protesters so close to our encampment that a trailer full of barricades was brought over and had to be placed in between us because of not only how they were speaking to us, but what they were doing to us, in the sense of coming onto our encampment. A young man spit on us, So there was quite heated moments there, but like I said, we didn't have too much police interaction, unlike other schools.
Well, what is also concerning, Bryce, are the reports that, like at Ole Miss, just the anti-black racism that we see here, the anti-Palestinian racism that we see here. No one's talking about that, Bryce. I mean, at Ole Miss, they had quite a nasty confrontation. The Hill reported that there was a GOP, U.S. House of Representatives member who was applauding the fact that they were calling this black woman racial epithets. Nobody said anything about it. I mean, that aspect of these demonstrations, Bryce, have not been amplified at all.
No, you're exactly right. One of the things that our encampment has endured every single night since the encampment went up is, protesters and hecklers yelling slurs at our encampment. During prayers, during evening prayers, you would have students across the street set up obnoxiously loud speakers and blast the same song in repeat, so the prayers can't be heard and so no one can hear themselves think. And at night, we've even had people call people hard R's, just belligerent drunk white kids or what have you. But it highlights one of the incongruities in the official narrative surrounding these protests, in that the reason for the repression is because of fears of anti-Semitism or hate speech that might turn into violence. At least that's what our state police chief said in justification for violently raiding the encampment. But of course, this is A, completely fabricated, but B, ignores the very real anti-black, anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim rhetoric from the counter-protesters that's well documented and pretty easy to find if you're looking. But the mainstream corporate media doesn't want to have this conversation about students being violently Islamophobic. Instead, they're covering students being anti-Semitic, even if there's very little evidence of this. And the reason they do this is because, like I said earlier, painting these protests as anti-Semitic has been the most effective way for the Israel lobby and supporters of Israel to delegitimize criticism of Israel. They'll invoke the Holocaust, they'll invoke, the pogroms in Russia, and they'll say that the people protesting in support of Palestine are just the same as that. Meanwhile, their side is yelling horrible slurs, calling people N-words, T-heads, etc., terrorists. They like to do this, but the mainstream media does not point out the asymmetry in the demonstrators' behaviors.
Well, Trinice, have Kat, Julia, have you been? Ariel, have you been hearing about these racist attacks upon Black and Palestinian and Muslim students? Anyone?
Absolutely. They're grotesque.
But no one. But Ariel, no one's talking about it.
That member of Congress that was grotesque, his retweeting of that, and to be anti-racist is to stand against all forms of hatred. And what is happening with this turn now, anti-Semitism, I've been thinking to myself, because certainly there's horrific anti-Semitism in the world, but we need a new term for it, because they have diluted it so much that the term anti-Semitism today just really means support for Palestinian rights. And that in itself endangers Jews.
How so?
Because when there is real anti-Semitism, it's either disregarded because we're so used to the false accusations that even we don't take it seriously, or it's ignored by the folks like the Anti-Defamation League, who want to go after just supporters of Palestinian rights. We have folks like the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, giving a pass to real anti-Semitism, to real anti-Semites like Elon Musk, the owner of now X, formerly Twitter, who lifts up white Christian nationalists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis. In fact, he is reinstating the account of, or just has reinstated the account of Nick Fuentes, a genuine bona fide neo-Nazi. And we see folks like Jonathan Greenblatt give him a pass because he is pro-Israel.
But it's interesting because you see the Jewish some of these Jewish counter protesters who have been in league with with white nationalists. As a Christian, I just have a very hard time calling them Christian nationalists. They're white nationalists. That's what they are. Your religion is supposed to shape you. You're not supposed to shape your religion. And so I think you have to get very, very clear on that. I mean, Julia, what do you say about that? I mean, because there's a lot of racism that no one is talking about. Of course, you need to talk about anti-Jewish sentiment, and I'm careful about that because Muslims are Semitic people too. It's just all so crazy, and we've conflated so much that a lot of the truth has been covered up. Julia.
Yeah, I think that there's just so much there, but I think that at UNC, like, we saw the police and the white nationalists and likely the Zionist protesters as well hurling racial slurs, homophobic slurs, all during what was happening. And I think with the anti-Semitism, like, I think we have to recognize that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are coming from the same place. They're coming from white nationalism, from white supremacy, and we have to fight against them together because otherwise they'll just be fractioning and we're not doing anything to accomplish that fight. And so yeah, I think that's really important. And then I think we've seen forever Zionists working with people who are anti-Semitic. When we look at white Christian Zionism, we see deep anti-Semitism. When we look at white nationalism, we see deep anti-Semitism. But for these Zionist kind of protesters, what is most important is Zionism, and they do not care about anti-Semitism when it comes down to it. They care about Israeli nationalism, about Zionism, and about U.S. nationalism.
Well, I think we have to also be honest about how many in the Zionist movement lean into their whiteness. We're out here. We have to put all that stuff on the table. Because anytime you see the ugliness that we saw at Ole Miss just a couple of days ago, and no one addresses it, no one's really talking about it. Certainly, Ariel, this is the platform where we're hearing about it. I mean, this is awful. I mean, and it has been documented that Palestinian and Black dissenters are bearing the brunt of the arrests and the punishments.
And that this is nothing new, right? And if we look for a moment at Israel and the settler colonial project that it is, we see as well stratification there of different types, of different Jews who are Arab Jews, otherwise known as Mizrahi, or Black Jews, Jews of color. And so it is such a system there. It was built on and designed to model centuries of European and American racism and racial structuring. So, and look, here we are in the United States, and this is nothing new. This type of repression, this type of grotesque racism, we're making some progress here, but we got a long ways to go. And certainly we are seeing pro-Israel forces align heavily with white nationalism. And let's face it, there are many forms of religious nationalism. We have, and we see such a close alliance between white Christian nationalism and Jewish nationalism. Right after October 7th, where we had the massacre in southern Israel, and then the horrific war began in Gaza, Israel sent their ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, to speak to Christians United for Israel, which is the largest, actually, very much dwarf Jewish support for Israel. That's white, Christian, evangelical support for Israel, led by Pastor John Hagee, who is probably the most prominent anti-Semite in the U.S. And he also spoke at the big rally in Washington, D.C., pro-Israel rally. He has said such things as that God sent Hitler to be the hunter to bring the Jews back to Israel, and all of this is to prepare for the Armageddon. And he is, this celebrity for the state of Israel, for pro-Israel groups. So we see these, alliances, and we have to be careful not to let ourselves are horrific, racist, hateful forces.
That is insane that John Hagee would say this, and no one talks about it. That's not part of his tagline. So we got to talk about this. What's really happening in these demonstrations? What's really being brought out? I hope you go to rainbowpush.org and join the movement, and please tune into the Word Network and to rainbowpush.org so that you can see the Saturday morning forum. It's really kind of changed formats. It's more of a talk show so that people can get a chance to really talk through issues. I hope you'll join us at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time every Saturday. And join me on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, from 6 to 8 a.m. Monday through Friday, and here. So let's talk about this. What's really happening on these campuses? Were you aware of this militarized presence that our young people are having to live under if they are dissenting? Are you aware of the anti-Black, anti-people of color racial epithets that are directed at Black and Palestinian dissenters? Are you aware that much of this movement is being led by young Jewish persons? So what are you saying to them when you're calling this anti-Semitic? What are you saying to them? Let's talk about this on Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Coming up, we'll have closing thoughts from Reverend Jesse Jackson right here on Keep Hope Alive. It seems like just yesterday.
You all, there's a whole lot going on with this. There's a lot to unpack. And I want you to lift up your voices and tell these stories.
That's why my son created
every time that you can, in every way that you can. Because when I'm listening to the narrative that is being passed out, that is being spread by the corporate media, what's happening is, to me, and I think, and Ariel and I are older, so we've seen a lot of things. They're setting up a dangerous confrontation, I think, Ariel. Now, Donnie D said that this is way away from Kent State, so he thinks that, this is, that parallel is incorrect. I disagree with that, Ariel.
Me too.
Because when you said that there were snipers overseeing you, I said, whoa, hold on, no one's talking about that, Bryce. So someone gets,
right.
Okay, go on. Because if someone gets shot, I guess it'll be one of you who did it. I don't know. They're not talking about
it. Well, I kept saying that it was a faulty safety and a sneeze away from a tragedy. The fact that they were able to spend this much money just in order to prevent students from having tents on a park just shows the lengths that they're willing to go to protect the relationship with Israel and the military system writ large. It's ridiculous. It's the violence against students peacefully protesting.
Do you see the protest or the really people's awareness? Is it growing in Florida, Kat and Shanice? Let me start with you, Kat.
That's 800-927-2400.
I would say
1
yes
second.
and
I
no.
will have to hop off soon, Santita. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries, sweetheart. But I'm so glad that you were here. Would you like to make a closing comment in 2 minutes?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay,
I have
fantastic.
about like a minute and a half minute to come back.
Okay,
Sorry, Kat, continue.
when we get back, you're gonna have a minute to make that comment. Okay, Bryce.
Roger that.
Okay, fantastic. Kat.
I would say yes and no about the increase of people becoming more aware of what's going on in Palestine and what's going on at these encampments.
Mm-hmm.
For example, we had a lot of community support. We had people dropping off dinner, lunch, snacks, tons of water. So there was people who really wanted to help us out, but maybe couldn't be there. And we had students just walking past saying, "Oh my goodness, I had no clue this was going on. Can I learn more and sit here?" You know, so there was a lot of encouraging actions, both by the community and people on campus that just said, "Okay, people want to know more. People want to be a part of this." You know.
Mm-hmm. Trinice, what are you seeing? Because Donnie D, bless your heart, you've come back, and I appreciate your interacting with us, Donnie. You said what's going on today has little to nothing to do with anti-Semitism, racism, and the likes. Forgive me again. There's nothing to forgive. You have your opinion, and we respect it. I just respectfully disagree. But Trinice, do you see what are you seeing happen at your HBCU? I know at mine, at Howard, there's a lot of awareness, but Howard's in Washington, D.C., which is the seat of government, and international news is local news there. So there's that. So what are you seeing?
So currently at FAMU, there are a few camps, like a few camps aside, not an actual camp, unfortunately, which is they want to help, but people are afraid of how it might affect their careers.
Oh, yeah.
Then you have the people who know that genocide is wrong, but they don't.
Well, no, hold that thought.
It.
Can you give that to me in the next segment?
We want to hear from you.
Yeah, sure.
Because that's a very real fear that Black students have. Hold on,
Jesse
please.
Jackson at KeepHopeAliveRadio.com.
Hey, stay tuned for the second hour of Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson, trying to give you some information about what's happening at these student encampments, this military presence. Bryce Green, who's no stranger to this show, indeed he's a family of on this show, has been banned from his campus in the midst of his graduate program for 5 years. The last minute belongs to you, Bryce Green. Where do we go from here?
Well, the reason that these student protests were repressed so much is multifaceted. First and foremost, universities and state governments and the government, the federal government, are hell-bent on maintaining America's support for Israel. And it's important to suppress any indication that there's a popular will to end that support for Israel. The current genocide only persists because Americans and American institutions are providing material support to Israel. Students rising up provides pressure for that support to end. And therefore, these have to be nipped in the bud. That's why they put a sniper on the roof. That's why they put a chopper in the sky. That's why they put riot police. That's why they gave them assault weapons and shotguns and all manner of military might for a peaceful demonstration. Another core reason that these protests were suppressed is that
Got 10 seconds.
It teaches students that they can rise up and fight against oppression. The biggest lesson for the oppressors that they want to impart on the public is that if they raise their heads, they'll be punished. Another world isn't possible. But students are beginning to understand.
Thank you for listening to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. For more information on upcoming shows and guests, please visit our website at www.keephopealiveradio.com.
Keep talking, because Arlene said that the protest must be peaceful or support is lost. The protesters are being peaceful. You need to look at who the counter protesters are, Arlene. That's what we've been trying. That's the point. That's one of the points that we've been trying to make today. But what were you saying, Bryce? I want you to finish your thought before you go. Is Bryce?
I would just like to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just like to note that, again, the reason that these peaceful protests must be suppressed by the state is because they pose such a challenge to the status quo about how people are supposed to live their lives without seriously engaging with political issues, but also because on this issue, the support for Israel is sacrosanct in the American political economy. For both of those reasons, the students had to be violently repressed. But the students today understand that despite this repression, they still have a responsibility to act, and they still have the power to change the world. And that's the most important lesson of all.
Amen to that. Sending you so much love,
Good
Bryce.
morning.
I'm going to circle back with you a little bit
Thank you,
later,
Santita.
okay?
With Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Absolutely.
Okay. Stand by, everybody. And let's bring up Dr. Professor Johnston.
To speak with Reverend Jackson
I'll
live,
get him right if we
call
get
toll
Okay,
free
of course.
1-866-594-HOPE. That's 1-866-594-4673. And now, the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the second hour of Keep Up Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. It's a joy to be with you. I'm Santita Jackson. What a privilege it is to be with you today as we talk with the students, not just about them, but these student leaders who have been, well, some of them might not have started off as leaders, but you sure are that. They are in the encampments. They are voicing their opposition to the ongoing genocide in Gaza. They're calling for peace. They're calling for an end to an apartheid state. They're calling for Israeli security and Palestinian justice, because indeed they're married to each other. You can't have one without the other. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, though, also Ariel Gold, Fellowship of Reconciliation, and Julia from UNC Chapel Hill, and Kat from the FSU Mighty Dissenters, and then, of course, Trinice from FAMU. From the Youth Action Fund. Let's talk about what's happening on these campuses, but also we're going to have Professor Angus Johnston, the founder of StudentActivism.net, who's going to help us to understand the history of student protest in America. Of course, Dr. James Zogby will be joining us at the bottom of the hour, but we've got these students here who can tell us what's happening. What's happening? Are you surprised to know about the extent to which we have this militarized presence watching them? What about at Northeastern University up in Boston, where you had a peaceful demonstration, and then a young man inserts himself into the demonstration, a counter-protester draped in the Israeli flag, insulting the Israeli flag and the Israeli people, to me, in my opinion, by doing that, and he starts shouting, "Kill all the Jews." The next morning, when these demonstrators were visited upon, he wasn't arrested, they were. All of them. We had more than 2,000 arrests. But we keep hearing about the violence and the vile language against Jewish people. And that is vile. That should never happen. But it's not coming from them. But what is coming from the counter-protesters? Anti-Black slurs. People being called the N-word. Slurs against Muslims and Palestinians. That is what is happening, and we're not hearing about that at all. So let's talk about this. 866-594-HOPE, 866-594-4673. The violence that you're hearing about is not coming from the demonstrators. And it could be prompted by this militarized presence. Who needs snipers to oversee a peaceful encampment? What about the counter-protesters who released rats on the encampment at UCLA? Why did not the LAPD and the UCLA police not react to the violence directed against these protesters, the people who were sitting in the encampments, who were living there? The police stood down for 3.5 hours as these students were being attacked in the UCLA encampment. We've got to talk about that, everybody, because that's not being amplified. But we can do it. And we're doing it right here on Keep Up Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Go to rainbowpush.org, join the movement, and let's get ready for Chicago in August. It is going to be thrilling, and I pray that it will be safe. But we'll see. Back with more of Keep Up Alive in just a few minutes. Love it.
Yeah, that ain't green.
I love that Black Soprano wobble. I love it.
Let me get Dr.
Dr.
Professor
Johnston. Yes, Professor Johnston.
It seems
Well, you all, there's a whole lot going on
True.
here.
Good morning,
Okay.
Professor Johnston. I am Ryan here with Santita and Keep Hope Alive. I'm gonna get you locked in, okay?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Johnston?
You hear me?
Oh, yes, twice in 1 week. I've got
Yeah.
I've got Ariel Gold from the Fellowship of Reconciliation, but I would imagine who would be some of your favorite people. We have some students with us who are participating in these protests. We have Kat from Florida State University, the dissenters, the Florida State University dissenters. We've got Trinice from FAMU, the Youth Action Fund, and we have got Julia from UNC Chapel Hill. Bryce Green just left us, the young man, the graduate student at Indiana University, who's been banned from campus now for 5 years. And he was sharing with us they have been sharing with us, Julia. I mean, really, they've been on the receiving end of racial epithets, a militarized presence that no one in the corporate media are talking about, that are trained on these students. And a few of our listeners have said, well, this is not akin to Kent State. I said, oh my goodness, I was a little girl when it happened, very little girl. But I just remember, children have your memory is connected to emotion.
Yeah.
And I just remember how horrified my parents were. And of course, that photograph of that young woman kneeling over her fallen fellow student who'd been killed. You can't unsee that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and of course that photo is a very large part of the reason why we remember Kent State all these years later.
Yeah.
I mean, when we talk about Kent State, a lot of people imagine that it was an isolated event, but of course at South Carolina State College in 1968, at Berkeley in 69, and then 9 days after Kent State, at Jackson State, we had the police or the military turning their guns on the young people, either protesters or passersby, right? At Kent State, 2 of those who died were just walking to class. And so I think that when we say this isn't Kent State, we're not at that point. I think that there is an argument to be made for that, but you don't get to Kent State overnight. The road to Kent State goes through South Carolina. It goes through Berkeley. And we have already seen a gun discharge by a police officer who was trying to turn on his flashlight and instead fired a bullet. We have seen the way that this kind of protest spirals into police violence before.
Julia and Kat and Trinice, were you aware of what happened at Jackson State and South Carolina State and Berkeley? Were you all aware of that as well?
Of the police violence there?
Oh, we're still here. Yeah.
Are you at these universities? Are you referring to the police violence that occurred there? Around?
It's awful, but no one is. Well, we're talking about it, but Ariel, I just think it's this mischaracterization of these young people, and really, no. I mean, there is no discussion of this militarized presence on these campuses now. None.
I am. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, stand by. We're coming up, and I'm coming right to you. And I'm going to open it to these young people if they want to ask you any questions, because this is a professor class is in session, everyone.
594 HOPE. That's 1-866-594-4673.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. What is happening with these student protests? What's really going on in these encampments? If you listen to corporate media, one would think that they're violent. One would think they are being cautioned to be peaceful. No one's talking about the counter protesters. I mean, we're not seeing the ugly images. from Ole Miss as they're calling a black woman the N word. And that's happening over and over and over and over again to the black and Palestinians who are in these encampments. They're on the receiving end of a lot of racist talk. But we're not hearing about that. Are they frightened? Maybe so, but they are steadfast. We're only hearing about Jewish students who are frightened, and we should hear about that. But we should hear about that as
Keep
well.
Hope alive. Hold on 1 second for me.
And we need to know who's calling these people names. And the counter
Keep Hope
protesters
alive.
are.
What's her name?
Some of whom are Jewish, some of whom are white nationalists.
Hey, what's your name?
Let's talk about that, everybody. And how do we get, and what are these young people asking for?
Hold on 1 second.
Well, they're asking for a boycott, divestment, and sanctions against a state that has killed more than 35,000 people. Ralph Nader said we need to be aware of the fact that we are undercounting their deaths. There are some estimates that put the deaths of the Palestinians way above 200,000. People who've been visiting Gaza have said you smell the stench of death. So many people have been buried in the rubble and they have not been recovered. Oh, it's an awful situation. I saw a gentleman on television this week, intriguing interview, and he was absolutely brilliant. And I'm so glad that he has consented to be with us today. Reverend Jackson is too. Professor Angus Johnston. He founded something, studentactivism.net, but of course he's active on other platforms. And he really outlined, really the modern history and really the history overall of student activism in the United States. This is not new. So I want you to I'm here for it. I'm taking my notes. Class is in session. Professor Johnston, welcome to the show. What are we looking at here? Are these protests that we're seeing right now, did they just come out of nowhere? Do they ever?
No, they never do. There's always a bubbling up. And I think one of the things that leaps out is that these are students who know their history. The movement against the Israeli war in Gaza is one that is grounded in the history, as you said, of the BDS movement. It is grounded in the history of the movement against South African apartheid on the campuses in the 70s and 80s and even earlier. It is grounded in the Occupy movement, not just Occupy Wall Street, but the Occupy California campus movement of 15 years ago, and grounded in the movements of the 60s and I suspect even the 30s. But I think one of the things that we are seeing right now is that as much as this movement is being driven by what is going on the ground in Gaza and in Israel and Palestine more generally, it is also being driven powerfully by the suppression of these protests here in the United States. That the decision by Columbia to send in the police 2 weeks ago spurred an explosion of protest around the country, and every effort to tamp it down is bringing more students out onto their campuses because this is a suppression of peaceful, nonviolent dissent. And it's not just students who are rising up against it. We are seeing faculty standing up with these students far more than I've ever seen. There were more faculty defending their students, agreeing to put their bodies on the line, being arrested, being beaten, being barred from their campuses than I have seen in any other protest in American history.
Some people have said that this really has no parallel to Vietnam because the numbers are not there. What say you?
Well, the protests against the war in Vietnam built over the course of a decade. We are less than a month in at this point. And the protests in the 1960s were not just about Vietnam. They were about the military-industrial complex more generally. They were about civil rights and Jim Crow. They were about local campus issues. The movement of the 60s was a broad one, and it sprang up from the civil rights movement, right? The first student protests of the 1960s February 1st, 19.
Professor Johnson, we have to get you in a good place because you're going in and out. Okay. So I got you now. Yes.
The first student activism of the 1960s took place on February 1st, 1960, when 4 students from North Carolina Ag and Tech went down to the Greensboro Woolworth lunch counter. And sat in. They demanded to be served, they asked to be served, and they were not served, and they sat there at the lunch counter all day. And that protest sparked people in Greensboro first, and then across North Carolina, and then across the South, and then across the country. It led to the establishment of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and through SNCC led to a blossoming of protest, because what happened was that white students went down south in Freedom Summer and in some cases before, and they came back changed. They came back not only inspired, not only scared, but they came back having learned the tools of organizing and bringing them back to their campus. And so if this movement is the beginning of something, I expect it to expand in all sorts of different ways, in the way that the movement of the 60s did.
Could this be a harbinger of what we might see this summer at the Republican conventions, and most particularly the Democratic convention? Or do you think things will tamp down over the summer? Do you see this slowing down just generally?
I think that what we are seeing now is something that is clearly going to come back to the campus in the fall. We have now, I think, 7 campuses that have negotiated agreements to end the encampments that are taking place now. And in each of those 7 cases, the campus has agreed, the administration has agreed to continue a dialogue and to continue a discussion when you come back in the fall. And so they have set things up so that they get to have the encampment taken down now, but the movement is going to continue in the fall. The mass protests at the Democratic National Convention, I suspect that we will. But one question I don't know the answer to is whether the people who are doing those protests are likely to be the same people who are active on the campuses right now. I don't have yet a sense of where the center of gravity of these protests is, because I think a lot of people are being drawn into them who haven't been active particularly before.
Who are the counter protesters, and do we have a parallel to we're seeing in these counter protests from protests of the 60s, Free South Africa protest, and on and on?
I think what we are seeing is 2 distinct groups of counter protesters. In the early days, we were seeing, when these encampments were being set up, individual students or small groups of students were coming and engaging with them, often confronting them, trying to film them, trying to gain access to the encampment, those kinds of things. Those seem to be mostly not organized. Those seem to be mostly individual students contesting with other students. But what we have seen in the last few days is something very, very different. First, at UCLA, we saw an organized, coordinated attack on the encampment, a violent vigilante attack on the encampment, and we have plenty of evidence that this was coordination between pre-existing groups, none of which have anything to do with these UCLA campus. These were non-student radical groups coming onto campus to cause violence. And then what we have seen in Ole Miss in the last few days is something that reminds me and many of us very, very much of the 1960s. Large groups of gathered to heckle, to bait the protesters in a way that reminds us very much of the ugliest moments of the 60s.
Indeed, we just saw that at Ole Miss, and the protesters were absolutely outnumbered by the counter protesters. So what does that say? I mean, what is the line in the sand here with this particular protest, or is there one? What do you make specifically of what President Biden has been saying? Of course, Donald Trump, the former president, called for law and order. But it seems that President Biden wasn't too far from that himself.
I was disappointed with what Biden said, and I was particularly disappointed because he didn't frame it as I disagree with these protests on the content, which would have been a legitimate thing for him to say. He didn't say that we have seen instances of violence, of harassment, of bigotry, of anti-Semitism, and I condemn those, which would have been a legitimate thing to say. There have been examples where people have said anti-Semitic things or behaved in inappropriate ways in these protests, and it is entirely legitimate to condemn those. But what he did was he said broadly that he considered these protests illegitimate. And one of the things that leaped out at me was he said that one of the signs that a protest is illegitimate is if you're engaging in trespassing. Well, if the students who were arrested for trespassing, in many cases, were arrested for trespassing on the lawn of the campus where they are a registered student at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday. So that may be legally trespassing, but morally, I don't consider it to be that. And if we go back in the history of the United States protests, we see that going to a place where the law tells you you are not allowed to be and refusing to move on a matter of principle is at the heart of many of the most important and the most sacred protests in American history. And so to suggest that trespass itself makes protest illegitimate, honestly, I don't think even Joe Biden believes that.
Well, what do you make of the corporate media's coverage of these protests and of the protesters? I mean, I've not seen a real effort made to dig in and find out who the counter protesters are or to tell their stories. We're not hearing about the racial epithets being thrown at the Black and Palestinian and Muslim protesters. We're not hearing about that. We're not hearing about these young Jewish persons who are at the forefront of this movement, along with their Palestinian brothers and sisters. But what about this? What do you think of the media coverage, corporate media's coverage of this?
Media coverage has been a real mixed bag. I think that I have been thrilled to see how the student press has responded. There has been incredible work done by student newspapers and radio stations across the country. And I always look to them in any one of these protests, and I salute them this time. Just yesterday, New York Magazine released their new issue, which was a collaboration between the journalists at New York Magazine and the journalists at the Columbia Spectator. Student press and corporate press working hand in hand to provide an image of this, and I think that's an amazing model. I think that we have seen some moments in corporate media coverage that has given me reason for guarded optimism. The morning after UCLA, I was going on C-SPAN. And so I was very, very quickly trying to bring myself up to speed when I woke up. And the Daily Bruin, the UCLA student paper, had the story exactly right, that this was an attack by outsiders on the campus unprovoked. The LA Times had the story exactly right. The New York Times was presenting it according to the police and UCLA administration line that this was clashes between groups that were equally violent. But the New York Times yesterday or the day before released a large report, which I had some problems with, was using video taken by a local community journalist to prove exactly what the Bruin and the LA Times had said, that this was an assault on the encampment from outsiders. So I think sometimes the corporate press needs to be dragged kicking and screaming to cover this stuff right. But I think frequently they can be dragged.
So what do you make of? I mean, where do you see all of this going? I mean, do you think? I mean, has this awakened something? Are you surprised by the students and this level of activism, particularly in this post-COVID world? And indeed, they're not pulling, and they're being threatened with expulsion. They're being threatened with suspensions. Many of them have been threatened with the shutting off of employment activities, but of employment opportunities, excuse me. But they continue to press on. Are you surprised by that?
I have been surprised. Frequently, we will see a moment like this where something happens at one campus or a handful of campuses, and there is a flare for a few days or a week. That has not been what we have seen this time. There has been a mounting acceleration, which is still going on. And one thing that intrigues me, and which I haven't reached any firm conclusions about, but one thing that intrigues me is that this is a generation of students who came through the COVID lockdown when they were in high school or in their early college years. This is a generation of students who has not had reason to be inspired by American electoral politics since they were small children. This is a generation of students which has experienced as children, the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, which seemed to be winning real victories for a while and then have been turned back in many cases. This is a generation that is living through climate change and now the Gaza war. And they have arrived on campus. They were locked down early in their campus years, and now the campuses are opening back up, and this is the first moment of activism that we are seeing from them. And it seems to me striking, not only that they are rising up so powerfully, but that they are rising up in this particular way, building communities on their campuses, building encampments on these campuses, which are this is not a social media protest. This is not an online protest. This is a face-to-face, on the lawn, butts in the seat, talking to people protest. And it strikes me as a real reaction of hope against despair.
Well, and in the midst of a militarized presence, we had Bryce Green on from Indiana University, and the protest that really led to his being banned from campus for 5 years. He's a graduate student, first year. He said there were snipers on the roofs. And I think it was you. Was it you, Kat, or was it you, Julia, who said that there are tanks at the ready? Is it in North Carolina?
At the University of Florida, I was told by one of my friends who were there that there are tanks currently not out on the campus, but near the campus.
I mean, so I have 1 minute. Professor Johnston, what do you make of that? I mean, they're training really the military on our children.
Commissioned by President Nixon after the Kent State and Jackson State tragedies. And that report came back and said that a nation that is driven to use the weapons of war against its own youth is a nation on the edge of chaos.
Do you believe we're on the edge of chaos? 30 seconds.
I hope we are not. I hope, but the responsibility for turning back lies in the hands of the government.
I wonder what they will do. Call us at 866-594-HOPE. What do you think? And I'd like to hear Kat from Florida State University dissenters, and you, Trinice, from the Youth Action Fund and FAMU, and you, Julia. I'd like to hear you react to what you just heard Professor Johnston say. Do you think we're on a nation on the edge of chaos as we're looking at just unfathomable economic pressures and so much that is going on? What do you think? Back with more of Keep Hope Alive in just a few minutes.
Your opinion counts. 1-866-594-HOPE. That's 1-866-594-4673.
Is it Zogby or Zogby?
Zogby. Yeah, Dr. Zogby. Oh, thank you for asking. Mm-hmm. You know what? I'd like to have you react to this. Karen Lene said outsiders should not be allowed on campuses for safety reasons. If students are violent, attack police, security, and other students, they should be suspended. All are accountable for their actions. But Karen, I don't hear you talking about the counter protesters. You just heard as we go through this, as we peel back the layers of this onion, Professor Johnston, a lot of these counter protesters are the outside agitators, and some of them are just hostile students. No one is looking at them. The fingers being pointed
Good
at
morning,
these
Dr.
dissenters,
Ryan.
at these students.
It's he. Yeah.
Good morning.
Hi.
This is Ryan with Santita and
Yes,
Keep Hope
hi.
Alive. I'm gonna
Is
get
that
you locked in, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Thank you.
Professor Zogby. I mean, Dr. Zogby.
Yep, he's on there.
Dr.
Yes.
Zogby.
Hi.
Hey, you're on with Professor Angus Johnston. I saw him on C-SPAN this week, and he's a brilliant teacher professor from CUNY. But what he was doing was outlining the history of student activism. And I want you to meet, of course, the iconic Dr. Jim Zogby. Of course, I've known him practically all of my life, certainly through so much activity, so much activism. I guess you and my parents have been doing in this Palestinian struggle for about 5 decades now. But of course, he's been one of Reverend Jackson's senior advisors for years. Certainly, he helped to head up these historic Jackson campaigns and has gone on to really leave such a large footprint in American politics, particularly in the Democratic Party. And of course, we have Ariel Gold with us. But I've got some wonderful students, Uncle Jim.
Oh, great.
And of course, we have got Kat from Florida State University, the dissenters there. And we've got Trinice from FAMU, HBCU in the house. Got to say that. Of course.
Go Rattlers.
Come on now. Oh, excuse me. And we have got Julia from UNC Chapel Hill. Oh, all right. I'm not mad at you. Stand by. And of course, Ariel. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm Santita Jackson. We have been getting so much wonderful information from you, Professor Angus Johnston, studentactivism.net. How can we get in touch with you? Because, I that was the first place I went after I saw you on C-SPAN, but then I just started following you everywhere. Now I'm not a troll. I'm just someone who's following you. That's it. I just want you to know when you see me pop up. No, that's it. I am that.
I am at Student Activism on Twitter. I am Angus at dsty.social on Blue Sky. And I do have the website, studentactivism.net. I haven't updated it in a very long time, but I will be updating that soon with a lot of my most recent appearances and some new writing.
Oh, you're going to have to do that because I tell you, it's very catchy and it gets you going. Before we go to you, Dr. Jim Zogby, I'd like to get, of course, Ariel, but I'm going to start with these students about what you've been hearing from Professor Johnston. Julia, first you. What do you make of this time in which we find ourselves? Do you feel like we might be on the verge of chaos?
I'm not sure if we're on the verge of chaos, but I do think on like October 8th, I remember saying to my dad that this is my generation's Vietnam. And I think with the student movement now, we are seeing that. We're seeing students, myself included, be inspired by the protests we saw against the Vietnam War and the protests we saw against apartheid in South Africa. And so I don't know if we're on the brink of chaos, but I really hope and think maybe we are on the brink of change because we are seeing a reinvigorated student movement, which has seen so much success in the past.
But Julia, you saw something October 8th. You saw that so early. Why did you frame this within the context of Vietnam so soon after that that slaughter on October 7th?
So I study Palestine and I study Jewish anti-Zionism. And I think that I very quickly felt the force that Israel was going to use and what Israel was going to do, having seen it time and time again before. I did not expect it to last 7 months, but I did see it I guess I thought there was going to be mass violence enacted by the Israeli army and the Israeli government. And I think we know that the Israeli government right now is one of the most extreme right-wing governments they have had. And so, yeah, I guess I'm not sure why I knew it in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe some of it was my dad was very involved in anti-Vietnam War activism when he was in college, and we don't necessarily agree on Palestine. And I think some of it may have been me trying to say, look, this is an anti-war movement. This is about freedom and justice. And so maybe it was that, but I don't know. I did say that, and I do think now we are seeing a reinvigorated student movement.
Mm. Kat, what say you? I mean, do you think just more broadly we're on the verge of something bigger, like chaos in the society?
I wouldn't say chaos. I would definitely say something bigger. I think the U.S. is on notice, and they know that they are on notice. They know that there is a massive movement of people, both young, middle-aged, old, who are not going to stay silent on what's happening in Palestine, what's happening against the people of Gaza. And they have to react. And I think the reaction that we've been getting is mostly silence. And silence is violence. So they have to reckon with that. It's not going to be business as usual, per se. So that's what I think. I wouldn't say chaos.
Mm-hmm.
I think decisions are going to have to be made by our government, both local, state, and federal.
Well, let me ask you another question, Trinice. Karen Lene said, looking at Gaza is fine, but why aren't people looking at Haiti and Sudan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And just for the record, my show, tomorrow, we're going to start the show off with an update on Haiti, because we are not focusing on that. And awful things are happening there and all over the world. But why is it that, do you think, Gaza has garnered so much attention, Trinice? And let me ask you this also, as a Black person, why do you feel the need to be involved? Should have just asked the panel generally.
I definitely believe the reason why we're seeing more attention on Gaza is because, at least the current commentary is, or story is, Israel's an American ally, so we need to quote unquote help our allies. And then people learn more and more about like the situation, they're feel the need to get more involved. And I feel like the reason why we're not, and I believe we need to be more social with these issues about Haiti, the Congo, Hawaii, and all these other areas, is because these are not individual issues. These are all very connected in the fact that they're all victims of white supremacy, colonialism, and their countries being disabled by a whole bunch of white people who probably never set foot on that land. So the reason why I, as a Black person, and even Kat, like the reason why we're involved is because like we both know what it's like to be a Black person in America, and dealing with oppression, dealing with violence on our bodies, dealing with the trauma of seeing people that look like us experience violence and not sure if we're able to even live to see another day. So I feel solidarity in the struggle with Palestinians because they know what it's like to struggle. They know the same struggle that I'm dealing with. And then on top of that, it was a Palestinian man who died during the 2020 protest, whose last words were "Free Palestine and Black Lives Matter" before he was killed by the IOL. So I feel a very strong solidarity with them, as well as the people in Congo, as well as the people of Haiti, as well as the people of Sudan, and all these countries that are under the distress of white supremacy.
Dr. James Zogby, the Arab American Institute, I just gave people a snapshot of our history together. I don't remember not knowing you, quite frankly. It's always been an intersectional struggle for me. I think for all of us. Am I missing something here?
No, I think that I'm just going to make one quick observation about the chaos versus change, which I think the folks who you had on first correctly identified. This is change, not chaos. It will be chaos only if those in power don't recognize the need for change and try to repress the movement that is calling for change. It didn't have to go that way at University of Texas Austin, didn't have to go that way at Emory, didn't have to go that way at UCLA, didn't have to go that way at Columbia. It is the outside agitators who created the chaos, and by the outside agitators, I mean the members of Congress who showed up, the mayor who made some really horrendous comments, and the NYPD and the police in Texas, etc. They're the ones who create the chaos. And I fear that if they're not smart, Chicago's going to be a mess in August because they'll try to do the same thing. They'll try to repress it just like they did in '68, and the outcome will be devastating. And they need to be smarter than that, but I'm not sure that they will be. Now, there is a difference. Your father was unique with Dr. King and with Julian Bond and a few others because he understood the connection of the issues and had great people with him like Jack O'Dell and Ron Walters who also understood the connections. But many of the movements in the 60s were siloed. You would be in this movement or in that movement, but you know, when Reverend went to Palestine or when Martin Luther King came out against the war in Vietnam, it was, what are you doing this for? Stay in your lane, buddy. You don't belong in this one. But young people today are not siloed. They're into all of them at the same time. They get the connections. They see quite vividly that the issues are the same in every one of them. And right now, what's front line is Palestine. It was Black Lives Matter. It was women's issues. It was guns on campus, guns in the cities and killing kids. They're all together, and young folks understand the connectivity of all these issues. And I just think it's quite remarkable to see how expanded their consciousnesses have become, as opposed to my generation, which didn't know so many issues outside of the individual one we were working on. These young people understand all of them in many significant ways. It's really quite important.
Well, I want to ask you this question, and Professor Johnston and Ariel, and I'm not pushing our young people out, but we're older. We've seen some things. Of course, I was a very little girl, really, when Kent State happened and South Carolina State and Berkeley and all of that. But I want to know, I mean, we're closing more and more places where people can lodge protest. There are fewer and fewer spaces where you'll be able to do that during the Democratic Convention here in Chicago. I mean, what does that say to you?
It says to me that they're looking for trouble. You give space to protest. You make accommodations for people to have free speech. You actually sit down and talk with them. I mean, if the Democratic Party were smart, it would be sitting there to the folks who are leading these movements and saying, let's come to an understanding about what do you want and what can we do to meet some of your concerns. They're not doing that. Instead, they're shutting them out. The president gave a speech the other day that sounded like Richard Nixon could have given it. And I think that's asking for trouble. It means they're shutting the door when they ought to be finding a way to keep it open. They need young people's votes. They need votes from young Black voters, from young Latino voters, from young Asian voters, from young Arab American voters. They need those votes. They can't be throwing them away. And yet that's what it seems to be doing.
But, if you listen to the corporate media, they're saying that, this is not a high priority for young people. But all the young people I speak to who are in college or not in college, this is a priority for them.
When I do polling, if you ask people, give them 15 issues and say, what of these are the most important? The first one is always going to be jobs. Next one is going to be education. Next one's going to be healthcare. I mean, and it's true all over the world. But when you get into the intensity of feeling about issues at a certain point in time, you have to pay attention to that too. And even if only 30% of young people, which is what the polls say that what's happening in Gaza is one of the most important issues for them, 30% of a voter group that you need to win an election saying that is something you ought to pay attention to. Sure, 70% are going to say jobs when I get out of college is the most important one. It's logical. But if 30% say it's this war and how we're conducting it, you better pay attention or else you're going to lose votes you need to win.
Well, let me ask these young people, Professor Johnston, Ariel, and Dr. Zogby, because you are being threatened with not being able to get a job if you participate in this, maybe not getting into graduate school. I mean, Trinice, what say you? I come out of a black school as well, and black schools tend to be much more conservative because they have a harder time raising money. That's the president's job at the school. They have a harder time raising money, and it's they're locked in. So, are you seeing people shun the protest because they don't want the blowback?
Pretty much, yeah. I had a few of my friends say oh, I'm too scared to post anything, even on their social media about the issue because they're worried about them losing job prospects. I was doing a little bit of research on the South African apartheid and its connections with the HBCU protests. And they're even the same discourse we're experiencing now. It will be students are I'm not sure if I should speak on this issue because I don't want to get in trouble for speaking on it or risk the chance of me missing out on opportunities, or the other camp wishes. I care about the fact that people are being hurt, but I'm not even sure entirely the full context of the thing. And definitely does not help the fact that Israel has already been making deep connections with HBCUs, which I saw that NCAT had their own chapters of centers, and they recently posted on their Instagram a panel by the Israeli American consul where they said that their biggest threat to Israel at the moment is young Black leaders, which concerns me, considering the fact that they've been targeting HBCUs for a minute now. They send HBCU students over to Israel. They try to sponsor them for certain things. Then they offer to give money to HBCU, work with, I think they worked with Thurgood Marshall, the Thurgood Marshall Fund, on trying to build, quote unquote, build the gap between Black Americans and Jewish Americans, which as much as I would love for that to actually happen, I don't want it to be in the circumstances of us being exploited to oppress another group of people. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say.
No, I mean, that's a whole lot to say. I mean, so Kat, do you have any? Yeah, I mean, well, Dr. Zogby, I mean, because it's ironic because indeed it was a Black man and a Black campaign that really kind of opened the door and burst the dam on the Palestinian question in the late 70s and 80s with Reverend Jackson before he ran for president. Because boy, when you have the photograph of him hugging Arafat in greeting, that was the shot heard around the world, and boy, oh boy. I mean, he took massive hits, as Dr. Zogby's been taking massive hits now for the years. But you take them, right? I mean, Dr. Zogby, I mean, what do you do?
I mean, her last comment was just so marvelous, and I'm learning so much. We're doing a reverse thing here. It's young people teaching old people, not the other way around. So I'm just appreciating listening to them. I'm glad I'm part of this.
Well, I am too. Julia, what say you? I mean, you know, I think, because I think that he makes the point. I'm just popping around. You all are teaching us a lot in this moment. And we're seeing you do some really, really big things. As you've heard Professor Johnston talk to us about this history, you're part of that tradition. How does that make you feel?
I think that my whole life I've been taught to stand up against oppression and to stand for justice and to stand for human rights. And I think being a part of that history is really important. It's, like I said, both my parents were involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement. And
okay, we're losing you. I want to get you in a good spot. Okay. All right. That's better. Yes, absolutely.
Um, yeah, I was just saying both my parents were involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement, and I was really raised knowing about that. And I think it's when I was an undergrad, I immediately got involved in student activism. Um, my undergraduate degree is in peace studies, and we learn about this history in peace studies, and to be a part of it is important. But I think what is most important is to remember why we are fighting and remember why we are here, and that is because there is a genocide occurring in Gaza and there is apartheid. And I think that just like people fought until the end of apartheid in South Africa and fought until the end of the war in Vietnam, we have to keep fighting until there is a free Palestine from the river to the sea. And I think being part of that history is important, but what's most important is Palestine.
Well, I tell you what, even as you might have some disagreements with your father, and hey, when we're in school, we all disagree with our parents. It's just, I think that's just part of the deal. Uh, what your parents did right was instill in you a sense of right and wrong, a sense of justice. Now, you're going to have your disagreements here and there, difference of perspectives, but tell your dad, you're the reason I'm doing this.
Person, so many of the Jewish values I was taught are also why I'm there, and also why I'm standing in solidarity with Palestinians. And I think we're also, for Jews fighting against apartheid in South Africa or against the war in Vietnam, why they were doing that. And I think that is important to remember too. And there's so many values that we have, like the values of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, and the values of the B'Tselem Elohim, that we are all created in God's image, and that is why we are fighting, and that is why Jews who are in this movement are fighting in solidarity with Palestinians. And so those all come from my parents and from my community, and so I think that is important to remember.
Well, we're all coming from these great traditions. When I think of my father transferring from the University of Illinois to North Carolina A&T, because that is where the sit-in movement was. Ariel comes from a proud tradition, proud Jewish tradition. I could just cry when I think about all of these traditions, all of these roads that are meeting right here. What a blessing it is to be with all of you today. Get closing thoughts on Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Please go to rainbowpush.org. We need your support as we seek to support you. Back with more of Keep Hope Alive in just a minute.
Coming up, we'll have closing thoughts from Reverend Jesse Jackson right here on Keep Hope Alive.
Well, my wonderful people, Professor Johnston, you still there?
I am.
I want to thank you for being with us today. And my Uncle Jim, thank you for being with us. I know he was like, she's calling me again. Yes. Yes. Ariel talking. Yes. Yes, Ariel, I called yes. Well, because you know what, Kat and Trinice and Julia, we need to hear your voices. Professor Johnston, we need to hear your voice. Uncle Jim, we need to hear your voice. Ariel, we need to hear your voice. Because somehow or another, they're not talking to people who are looking for peace on CNN and MSNBC and Fox and OAN and all these other outlets. Not that that's where everybody's getting their news from now anyway. But it's just, when I see this massive pushback against what Trinice and Kat and Julia are doing, just know that you're on the right track. And, I'm so glad I watched C-SPAN. That's all I'm going to tell you, Professor Johnston.
Okay.
No, because everybody who's talking about these student protests, they're making these kids out to be demons.
Yeah.
Who really don't understand how America works. Is that, how is America supposed to work, Professor?
Well, I was on CNN for 4 minutes the other day, and I had an opportunity to say one thing in support of the students and how much I admire what they're doing. And I got a notification on Facebook the next day that quote had been on the morning news in Australia. I think people I think there is a respect for these young people. I think there is a hope for the future that they are representing, and a lot of us are hungry for that kind of hope in the space of this, in the place of this despair. And so I'm just so thrilled to be sitting side by side with these students because they're doing such incredible work.
Well, I thank you. Dr. Zogby, also known as Uncle Jim, what say you?
I agree with what Angus just said. The issue is that they're lifting us up and reminding us of our roots as a social justice movement, and I worry that those in power, especially on our Democratic side, not only don't get it, but are going to make some terrible misjudgments, and it's going to cost not only kids who are going to pay a price because of the repression, but it's going to end up costing America because it's going to elect Donald Trump. I mean, they're more worried right now on the Democratic side about disorder in the streets being used by Republicans than they are about genocide being committed by Israel with our money and our diplomatic support, which is a really horrific calculation to make on their part. There was just this lovely article in the Washington Post by Robin Given, who said that tents, she compared homelessness and what's going on in Gaza, and she said tents are a reminder to us of the problems that exist that we want to go away. And she said the problem is the tent. The problem is the problem that creates the need for the tent.
Absolutely.
And that's what we've forgotten. And pushing the tents away isn't going to make the problem go away. It intensifies the problem. And they just don't get that.
Well, they're going to see when they get to Chicago and to the ballot box in November. Stand by.
You're listening to Keep Hope Alive. We want to hear from you. Please email your questions or comments to Reverend Jesse Jackson at keephopealiveradio.com.
Wow, what a stirring conversation we've had with you, Kat, from the Florida State University dissenters, and you, Julia, from UNC Chapel Hill. And of course, you, Trinice, from FAMU, the Youth Action Fund, and Ariel Gold from the Fellowship of Reconciliation, fighting for peace, not just against war, but fighting for peace. That is what they do. And you, Professor Angus Johnston, thank you for helping us to see our children so clearly. They've all been fighting for a better world. Dr. James Zogby, as have all of you. And so we want to tell you that we love you and God bless you. I hope that you'll join me on AM 950 Radio Monday through Friday. Go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and go to rainbowpush.org and support us as we seek to support you. And as always, remember, on behalf of Ryan Lee and I, we want you to keep hope alive.
Thank you for listening. Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. For more information on upcoming shows and guests, please visit our website at www.keephopealiveradio.com.
My wonderful people, I want to thank you all for being with us today. I hope it was a good experience for you. I can't wait to have all of you back.
Yes, thank you so much. This was great.
It was lovely.
I'll be reaching out to you because, of course, I'm going to do another show this afternoon. Oh, I'm exhausted. But this is what I have to do. I have to pre-tape my shows until my home studio is built. And, but, this is all a blessing. And I want you, Julia, I mean it, Trinice and Kat, if you need us, please call us. Reach out.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, you're very welcome. Now roll over, get a little rest, and check your texts because I'm going to call and see if I can get any of you on this afternoon. Just go on and but get some rest for now.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
And
all right, thank you.
Professor Johnston.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us once again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I can't wait to have you back.
It's wonderful. Looking forward to it.
Oh, I can't wait. Do I have anyone else with me?
Just Anita from North Carolina.
And let me say hello to Anita from North Carolina.
She's on now.
Anita? Anita?
Hello?
Hey, sweetie. Love you so much. I'm sorry I couldn't get to you. I had a full panel today. What's on your mind, babe?
I know. I'm just letting you know I'm there.
Well, I love you. We love you. And
All
I was with Congressman Jackson yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time I see my brother now, I think of you.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I love you,
I
Anita.
can say that again.
Every time I see my brother Jonathan, I think of you.
Why?
Well, because
you think of your daddy and your history and what you're gonna have to do if he's not here anymore.
Well, we all have a moment. We're all gonna get out of here. There's no question. We're all gonna do that. I want my parents to stay as long as they can, but look, as my mother said, just a few days ago, she said, "Look, your father and I have given it our best shot." And I said that was more than enough, and so
I tell you,
proud.
My mother just passed.
Bless
February 1st.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. You know what? I'm stronger than ever. I'm more determined to keep it going.
Okay. Well, I want you to know I love you, and I'm thinking of
we
you.
love you all too, and I've told Reverend Al to get you guys with him on the air. You and Jonathan. This is serious. This is not a plaything.
Well, we're gonna keep on pushing, girl.
Well, tell your dad we love him, and it wasn't in vain.
Oh, I will tell him that. I will.
All right, and Martin Luther King, we love him, and that shot is important to me. It shouldn't be happening, and George Floyd is not in the Garden of Eden in that mess. But I love you all.
We love you, Anita.
All right. I just was making breakfast for my grandchildren, and I didn't hang the phone up. I'll see you later.
Well, thank you for hanging around with us. Okay.
I just let you know I'm with you. Okay. God bless. Have a great day. Don't think of none of that. Think about your future too.
I will. I promise you.
All right.
I'm gonna do everything
God
I
bless.
can. Absolutely. Love you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Come on now.
Okay.
All right, sweetie.
Have a good day.
Love
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye. I love you all. I'm gonna get on out of here because guess what I've got to do. Thank you, Jean. I've got to get ready for tomorrow's show, which I'm going to be pre-taping this afternoon. So I've got to run out of here. I'm going to go see my parents real quick. And I'm sending you all so much love. You want to say goodbye, Ryan?
Have a great day. Have a great week.
That's right, Greenville. Greenville, South Carolina. Greenville. See you all. Love you so much. God bless.